I found myself in a truly awful and unbearable situation, and I'm overwhelmed by the agonizing feeling that I'm about to make the biggest mistake of my life, one that could completely change my future. My name is Amy. I just turned 29. My fiance's name is Michael. He's 33, and we've been together for almost 5 years. Our wedding was planned for just 2 weeks from now. I always believed he was the most perfect, sincere, and kind-hearted man imaginable. I never once doubted that I wanted to spend the rest of my life with him. But last night, everything I thought was solid and unshakable crumbled in an instant. We live in a cozy, charming home in a quiet suburb of San Diego, California. In my mind, I had already built our future there. Family dinners, joyful holidays, a peaceful life together. Michael loves working with his hands, and yesterday evening he was building a new gazebo in our backyard. Meanwhile, I was in the kitchen, cooking dinner and casually chatting with my sister, Christina, about everyday things. Christina has been married to a guy named Ben for 4 years. They have a sweet 1-year-old son named Luke, whom I absolutely adore. During our conversation, Christina's phone suddenly started ringing. It was Ben. He sounded slightly worried and said he hadn't been able to reach her. Without thinking, I automatically told him that she had just left my house and should be home in about 20 minutes. But that wasn't true. She hadn't visited me at all that evening. At that very moment, Michael walked into the kitchen to grab a glass of water. He noticed the worried look on my face and asked who had called. I said it was Ben, looking for Christina. Then, feeling uneasy, I quickly texted my sister to let her know her husband was trying to reach her. But the strange, thoughtful look Michael gave me made me pause. I started to wonder if I had just made a serious mistake, if my quick lie might have raised some suspicion. Later that night, I woke up suddenly and realized Michael wasn't in bed. That was unusual and deeply unsettling. I got up to check on him and found him in the living room holding my phone. His face, it froze me to the spot. He slowly turned the screen toward me, and I saw our text exchange, Christina and me, hundreds of messages revealing her secret affair with a coworker named Jason. Cruel, mocking messages about Ben. My heart sank. I was flooded with shame and guilt. Michael had always made it clear how much he despised lies, betrayal, and especially cheating. Then he said the words that knocked the ground out from under me. "I can't marry you, Amy." Those were the most painful words I've ever heard in my life. The next day felt like a nightmare, or like I was trapped in a thick fog. I met with Christina and told her everything. She exploded, furious, blaming me for ruining her family and her life. We had a terrible fight. Now she holds me completely responsible for everything that happened. Michael moved out immediately, went to stay with his best friend, canceled our honeymoon trip to Florida, and informed all our friends and family that the wedding was off. My parents were furious. They'd invested a huge amount of money into the wedding and now blame me for destroying everything. I feel completely crushed, devastated, realizing how badly I messed up by hiding my sister's affair and talking behind her husband's back. I never imagined the consequences would be so painful and far-reaching. Michael refuses to speak to me directly. He only messaged me to say, "We'll need to have a serious conversation soon about the house and finances." I've started seeing a therapist, trying to understand why I let myself get caught up in this awful mess. I'm terrified I've lost Michael forever, even though I know maybe it's already too late to fix anything. Last night, Ben called me. He thanked me, said that even though it happened unintentionally, I helped him open his eyes to the truth. He told me Christina had moved in with her parents, and he's filing for divorce. He's also determined to fight for full custody of Luke. Then, this morning, something unexpected happened. I got a message from Michael. He asked if we could meet that evening to calmly discuss what happens next. All day, I couldn't focus. I kept replaying the conversation in my mind, imagining how it might go. We met at the same little cafe where we first saw each other years ago. I let myself hope. Maybe he chose that place for a reason. Maybe there was still a chance, but the conversation was hard, emotionally draining. Michael said he still loved me, that this was incredibly painful for him, but he just couldn't trust me anymore. He suggested we live apart for now, so we can both take time to think and figure out where to go from here. I cried. I begged him to forgive me, but he stood by his decision. A week had passed since that evening at the cafe. Michael had moved back into the apartment he used to rent before we lived together. We hadn't texted or called each other since. Our lives had suddenly split, as if someone had cut them apart with a sharp knife. I woke up every morning in a house that now felt empty and cold, imagining him waking up alone too, maybe with the same heaviness in his chest that I carried in mine. The silence in the house was deafening. Every movement echoed, as if the walls were reminding me of his absence. I stopped making real breakfasts, drank coffee while standing, without appetite. I'd stare at the gazebo in the backyard, the one he never finished building, and wonder how everything could change so quickly. The therapist I'd started seeing became my lifeline. We talked about so much: my dependency on Christina, my need to please everyone around me, even at the cost of myself. With each session, I started to understand myself better, my fears, my patterns, my mistakes. I could no longer afford to be the shadow who only existed to please others. It was painful, especially when I realized that this didn't start with Christina or Michael. It started in my childhood when I was taught to be convenient. I remembered being told not to argue, not to talk back, to be a good girl, and how that slowly turned into a constant anxiety, a fear that if I wasn't easy to love, I'd be left behind. Meanwhile, Christina tried to reach me. She sent angry messages at first, then desperate ones. She accused, then begged, then lashed out again. I didn't respond. I just couldn't be part of her lies anymore. Our parents were confused. My mom begged me to make peace with my sister, but for the first time in my life, I said a firm no. I had to explain that this wasn't just a fight. It was the end of a toxic relationship where I was losing myself. My dad supported me, but my mom struggled to understand why I had cut ties so completely. It was painful, because I could feel a growing distance between me and my family. But for the first time, I was acting for me. 2 weeks after the breakup, Michael asked to meet. This time, he suggested we meet at the oceanfront park where we used to go that first summer we fell in love. I got there early and stood by the water, staring at the horizon. The wind played with my hair and seagulls cried in the distance. I remembered how we used to laugh here, eat ice cream, and promise we'd always be there for each other. He approached quietly, like he always did when he was unsure. I noticed he had lost weight. There were faint shadows under his eyes. He had clearly been struggling too. "You look different," he said, standing beside me. I smiled. "I think differently now," I replied. And it was true. I was no longer the woman who blindly protected everyone else while forgetting herself. We talked for 2 hours. No yelling, no blaming. He told me how much it hurt, how betrayed he felt, not just because of the lie itself, but because I hadn't told him the truth first. I told him he had every right to feel that way. I didn't ask for forgiveness. I just shared what had changed. That I'd left the toxic dynamic with my sister, that I'd started a new chapter, that for the first time I was becoming myself. I told him about therapy, about the thoughts I'd been having, about how I was learning what boundaries meant, and what it felt like to be in a relationship not out of guilt, but out of love and mutual respect. He listened quietly, nodding, and then he said, "I don't know what happens next, but I see you now, the real you, and I want to get to know you again." Those words went straight to my heart. I felt a tiny spark of hope inside me, but I also knew the road ahead would be long. We didn't get back together that night, or even the next week. We started seeing each other once a week, just to walk and talk. Sometimes we were silent. Sometimes we laughed. Sometimes we talked for hours. It felt like we were rebuilding, this time, not as bride and groom, but as two people trying to be honest. 3 months later, I moved into a new apartment. Michael helped me move. He didn't offer to live with me. And I was grateful for that. We both knew that rushing things was what had broken us before. In this new space, for the first time, I felt independent. I decorated it the way I wanted, bought furniture I loved, light candles in the bathroom, started morning rituals. It was my space, a place where I could finally breathe. 6 months have passed. We're a couple again. But it's a different relationship now. There's no pretending, no need to win approval. There's respect, honesty, boundaries. I still go to therapy. Michael has started therapy too. And I'm proud of him. We don't hide our feelings. We talk about everything, even the hard stuff. We're learning to really listen to each other. We've both grown. Even our friends and parents have noticed. My mom recently said, "You look truly alive now." On the anniversary of the wedding that never happened, we went back to that same ocean house we once booked for our honeymoon. We spent the weekend watching the waves, talking, remembering. It wasn't closure. It was a beginning. We walked barefoot on the beach, laughed, drank wine, looked at old photos. We didn't talk about the future, but I knew it was possible. If not today, then someday. And maybe one day in the future, we'll talk about getting married again. But this time, not as an obligation, as a symbol that we chose each other, again, with awareness, with truth, without illusions, without pressure, without fear. For now, we're just living, enjoying each other, learning to be real, and maybe that's what love truly is.